Okay, it's live now. So we're good.
Yeah, I'm still waiting to see. I'm still seeing the thing saying waiting for Jerry Feldman.
You're saying what?
Oh no, it's there we go. Now I see it.
Yep. Takes a little bit.
We are actually waiting for Jerry Feldman, is that right?
Jerry's here. I'm here. Ian?
Hi, yeah. Oh. Sorry. Hello there. Good
How
to
you
see all
doing?
of you. Excellent. It's been a long time since I've been to a Blue meeting.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we've got 12 people on right now. It's pretty decent. And again, Jitsi works pretty well. And it's certainly free.
Yeah, free as in freedom. I look forward to
Yeah.
when we can meet in person again.
Yeah. I'd love to do that. I would seriously doubt that we'll be able to meet until at least January.
No guarantees there either.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. If we can't meet at MIT, we'll have to start looking for another meeting space.
Ooh, I hope they'll be able to meet at MIT again.
Yeah.
Is there an issue about meeting at MIT?
Right now, they're not allowing anyone to host meetings.
Oh.
As far as they're concerned, the pandemic's still going on. So, there's that
Okay. So it's a pandemic.
Yeah, it is.
Still. Mm-hmm.
They're not going to allow anything until the CDC says it's over.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I went down to the VA. The VA is actually giving boosters, and they said, it was open 7 days a week. But when I went down there, they're only giving boosters on Fridays. So no big deal. I will go back. So we are waiting for Federico.
Yeah.
Well, while we're waiting, I'll just say that I work at the Free Software Foundation, and we announced that the Libre Planet conference in March is going to be online. And so, yeah, we're still dealing with the pandemic for us, for our concerns. So, but the call for presentations is open. If anybody feels like presenting there, feel free to. I encourage anybody to submit a talk.
Yeah. Just since these things are online, I bought a great Wi-Fi dongle, which I'll show you. And you can see there's no light on it. I bought it on September 8th, and on October 18th, it failed. It hasn't worked since, so I can get it to work intermittently. So I'm outside of Amazon's return window.
Oh,
So we've been having some discussion online. I might get a PCIe card from Think Penguin. Yeah, my house is all Wi-Fi. Everything's Wi-Fi in the house.
Yeah, that's the way it is nowadays. I mean,
Yep.
wants to be connected up wiredly, you know. I mean, if you have something sitting at a desk, that's not moving, of course, but
Well, I'm in another room. Yeah, there is actually a I think it was a Cat 5 cable kind of hanging around here going through the floor. But I could probably hook it up to my cable modem and run another cable across the middle of the floor to here if I absolutely needed to. I have plenty of cable.
right, not as
But,
convenient though.
yeah, so, but I'm using a TP-Link Wi-Fi adapter that's probably about 6 or 7 years old. I kept it in my I kept it in my PC bag, you know, for when I went out to meetings and stuff like that. And it was my backup Wi-Fi. And it's pretty reliable, but it's only 2.4 gig. And so I want one that's has a better bandwidth. Yeah,
Okay, it's 89. What are these?
has anybody heard from Federico?
Yeah, not recently.
Okay. Hopefully he shows up.
Yeah, I think the talk description is pretty interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, you have a You could have the best software, and then somebody just hides a cable on your system, and it's like they have everything you ever input, all your passwords and everything, right?
Yep.
Do you have any idea what we're hearing in the background? Sounds like dishes or something.
Sounds like someone having dinner.
Well, problem is that I explained earlier is that a lot of people use their phone speaker or their PC speaker, and the problem is you're getting a little bit of feedback from that. That's why I said
Mhm.
headset.
I missed the mute button. Sorry about that.
Not a problem. So that's why I said headsets or earbuds actually work nicely on this.
Oh, I've got the headset on. I just forgot to mute.
Okay. Good.
The last email I see from Federico was on August 15th when he confirmed for October.
Okay, let me just email him. I think I might even have his phone number, but if he doesn't get here by around 7:15, I'll give him a call or something. I just sent him an email and we'll see. I see Shankar just showed up. So we're still in a question and answer period anyway. So.
As soon as I heard about this talk, my first thought was, I wonder if there's signed hardware, like a keyboard or a mouse or something, like they do with software.
Yeah, well, you can't really sign something physical. I mean, other than writing down your signature. But what do you mean by that?
Like if somehow the hardware could validate itself, some type of key, public key or something, and hey, I'm this, but I guess you could lie. I don't know. I wonder if there's some way to do it.
I think maybe some kind of intelligent firmware, but I'm sure that can be hacked pretty easily.
You could do a microcontroller with certificates, TLS and stuff, but then it's like a separate computer talking to your computer.
Yeah, well,
No, that's true.
well, that's like your big servers now that have remote power control, and the console is actually a separate computer.
Well, yeah, I guess, yeah, nowadays where it's like we're
Yeah.
moving more to more and more multiple computers talking to each other, really.
Yep. Yeah,
Or
I mean,
it doesn't even have to be expensive servers. If you've seen the project out there called it's either Pi KVM or KVM Pi, I can't remember which, but you can plug in a Raspberry Pi with a a custom hat on top of it, and it can do all sorts of things for your basic tower desktop, including all of the front panel power buttons and everything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I set up a relay to toggle the front power panel
Yeah.
on some servers, and then I found out, hey, you know what? About half the time when they need the power button pressed, they actually need all the power drained completely. So you need a PSU that can turn them off for 30 seconds and then turn them back on.
Yeah, I went to Adafruit and got a controllable outlet, like a power strip, that has built-in relay for the AC, but I haven't built that project to actually connect it to my home server yet.
Yeah. I worked with a whole bunch of HP servers, and they all had separate consoles, and so you didn't really need KVMs to work with them. But KVMs are really nice to use. I had when I was working at Algorithmics, I had a KVM for everything.
Yeah, one of the things we have for the Blue servers is a network power strip. You can actually toggle the power remotely.
Yep, that's what I use.
Yeah, that's an ancient one.
As far as I'm concerned, the more ancient, the better.
Hey, there's Federico.
Yay!
Hello.
Hey, Federico.
Hi, Federico. It's been a while.
Indeed. Oh, look at that. IT has decided that my laptop must be upgraded.
Okay.
Okay. I think we can ignore it if they don't reboot me remotely. All right. So let's see. I think we actually have a decent microphone, so I should be sounding all right.
You sound good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. So let's work out the screen sharing and then off we go. I have a very elaborate camera setup that's in development at the instigation of Bill Ricker, but it's not complete yet. So this time around, what we will do is we will use one camera so they don't drive Jabber crazy, switching between different logins. And we'll see just exactly how good this built-in camera is. Okay, so if we start the slides, which monitor do they take? They take that one above. Now let's see if that one is a screen share. So once I screen share, I want to screen share the big one. Let's do it. Let's see if it works as it should. I have to say I've become a master with with Microsoft's sharing app recently, but I haven't used Jitsi since the last time I presented at BLE.
Well, the interface has changed a little bit over the years.
Yeah, did you
Okay,
use
so it's
Jitsi or Blue Jeans the last time?
I think we used Blue Jeans 2 times ago and Jitsi the last time, but I'm not absolutely sure.
Okay, your screen share looks good.
Okay, so are you getting the slides full screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yay, we did it. First time. I mean, first try. Okay, I don't see the camera light anymore. Does that mean that I'm off webcam?
I don't see you on the webcam. Yeah.
Interesting. I guess there is only one screen that's going. That's fine. You don't need to see me all the time. But we will need to go in and out of projection mode to show the hardware. So let's see how that will play out. We'll go like this. And then when I come back here, what do I need to do? Really, I need to stop sharing all the way?
Sometimes it's better just to stop sharing and start a new share.
Right. I would like to see if I can leave the camera always on. Let's see what happens. Can you still see the screen?
Yeah, we've seen a picture with you. You're facing a small thing in the bottom right corner.
Okay, perfect.
Looks
so maybe we'll do that, or if it stays small, I'll have to end the share to be able to show you the hardware in full screen. Okay, so let's go back to the deck. All right, we're good already. So shall we start? Oh, no, wait. The slides. Now, shall we start?
Yeah, looks good. You can start now. I'm going to mute everyone so I can find control for that. Here it is. Mute everyone else. Everyone except Federico.
Okay, so we're basically doing my DEF CON presentation from the summer. I actually had an interesting moment half an hour ago, and it looked like my copy of the slides had been deleted. So there was a sheer moment of terror because I thought that the most secure place where I put my slides was not in order. And then turned out to be one of those UX snafus. The Macintosh Windows, you can place objects outside of the visible window, and you don't have scroll bars. So I had tried scrolling in a variety of directions, but apparently not the right direction. So it was exactly where it was supposed to be, just out off screen somehow, just to keep things interesting. So anyway, this is the DEF CON Hardware Hacking Village presentation from DEF CON 2021. That's why the logo there on the corner. And yeah, so I think you all know me already, but in brief, I've had the privilege of spending my entire career in free and open source software. I'm currently the product management director for Ceph at Red Hat. Previously, I was the Ubuntu Server PM at Canonical. And if you go back the decade, I was the systems management czar at SUSE. So you could say that the task has nothing to do with my day job. I'm a manager, so as a former embedded developer, this is officially my definition of fun. The obligatory disclaimer is that we'll most likely break some hardware playing with it, and it will come out of your pocket. No liability if you follow our instructions and stub your toe or bring about the end of the world, or simply break your device, which is far more likely. So you have been warned. With great power comes great responsibility, so don't do anything you should not. Don't just obey the law, but also be nice. Let's get going. We have a ton of slides. I think it's like 63 slides. And technically, we could even do 2 demos. So we have to hustle a little bit. Now, this talk is all about abusing the security assumptions we have made about USB devices. A security analyst posted a dissection of the most impressive device here, which is actually one of the smallest ones. So I went around and started shopping for all sorts of random things. The fanciest device is here in the Intel branded box. Usually when we open it, it plays the Intel tune, which, by the way, is no longer the Intel tune. They rebranded their soundtrack this summer, which probably is a horrible abuse of their trademark, since there is something truly evil in there. But the battery is running out, so it's that joke is not working too well anymore. Need to change the battery. So let's start with something much more benign before we go all dark and deep. This is something that was on sale on ThinkGeek when ThinkGeek existed. I think it was bought out by GameStop and then phased out as a brand. I think it was a Black Friday a few years ago, and there is a whole class of devices called a Noyatron, something you would lose in the cubicle of someone you don't particularly like. And every once in a while, it would make a chirping sound just to annoy them, like make a squeak, no idea where the sound comes from. And this is the computer version of that. This is actually nicely designed, not something you have to fiddle with software to configure. Here there are switches, physical switches. It is a USB device with a dial for time delay. You select the time delay and it will flip your caps lock, tap the keyboard, move the mouse, or perhaps all three. And this is perhaps the most benign of these things. Garrett Mace designed a smaller stealth USB caps locker about 10 years ago for April Fool's Day, and that you can build. Or you can make one with an $8 DigiSpark if you do not want to fiddle with protoboard and make your own from scratch. So in Garrett's version, maybe less polished, but quite interesting nonetheless. It fits almost completely in your USB port, as you can see there on the right. It uses an Atmel AVR 80Tiny45, and it has great educational value as you learn how to run a USB stack right on top of the hardware, no operating system helping you out there. Carrying out this attack is hideously simple. Obviously, you can do it without any particular privileges. You just stick it in the back of the computer of your victim, and when they log in, it will have access. In some cases, even without logging in, because it is a keyboard, an HID class device to be precise. So it is a keyboard and/or a mouse. This one is innocent enough, but from there, things get quickly worse. So the HID class of USB protocol defines human interaction devices. Keyboards, mice, game controllers, a variety of other low bandwidth devices like magstripe readers, which are really keyboards. These are all HID devices in the USB world. Thermometers, RFID readers, barcode scanners, even UPS batteries are interfaced as HID devices. At Princeton, they actually taught a class about turning random hardware into an HID device as their class project. They would just go to a junkyard, find something that they found interesting, and then your project for the class would be turning that into a device with a USB HID interface. You can find the lectures online. It's actually a pretty cool idea in a way to teach embedded programming to undergraduates. One benefit of a well-defined specification like the USB HID class is the abundance of device drivers available in modern operating systems. On the downside are the inherent trust keyboards are extended. and the possibility for USB devices to change their type or announce additional sub-devices while plugged in. Combined with USB's default behavior of accepting any device that connects to it, if there is a driver, let's start to look at how this can be exploited. So Tomo is a very small device, also not meant to do anything evil. It is basically the size of a YubiKey. You, of course, know what a YubiKey is. It's a second factor device that basically fits inside a USB port. You tap it, it generates a number in a pseudo-random sequence that's used to authenticate you as a second factor. Tomo is a USB platform to prototype things like YubiKeys. The author explained that while a YubiKey costs around $50, a similar device can be built for $2 in parts. So his intent here is to drive down the cost of that kind of device by an order of magnitude. But you don't have to build YubiKeys with Tomo. You have a microcontroller, so you can build pretty much whatever you want. The only thing is, what do you have? You have a Cortex M0, so you're writing to bare metal, no OS again. 8 kilobytes of RAM and 64 kilobytes of flash. Oh, and it's the first Open Source Hardware Association part certified out of Australia. So it has a cool 0001 serial number in their certification record. It's available from Seed Studio, so you don't have to go and assemble your own or order a printed board and then do surface mount soldering on your own if you don't feel like enduring that particular kind of pain. It has way more flash than a DigiSpark, 64K instead of 8K, and the price is comparable. And you have 2 buttons, 2 LEDs. You don't have a whole lot of software or complex stacks here. But if what you are doing is USB and has a 2-button, 2-LED UI, you can basically build it here. This could potentially be a hidden device fitting inside a USB port entirely. On the other hand, there are much better platforms for an attack. Later, we will see one with 4 cores and 8 gigs of RAM. But it is interesting to prototype this kind of YubiKey-like applications, limited interaction, but you could probably build your Anoyatron with this platform. It also seems like completely interaction-free devices are not as interesting, or at least not as malevolent. I guess things are interesting only when they cause trouble. So let's look at something that will cause trouble. So I plugged in the Anoyatron and have access to your keyboard, either because the OS trusts keyboards inherently and lets them in, or because I leave that plugged in, and when you log in, the device gets in. You usually need both to occur. Again, physical access is both necessary and sufficient condition to pwn the device. We have an entire industry of pen testers, and the gold standard for them is a keystroke injection tool disguised as a USB device, as a USB drive, which is this, the rubber ducky. The USB rubber ducky is the original keystroke injection tool. It's about 10 years old, although the hardware has been updated. While it looks like a USB drive to us, it acts like a keyboard when talking to the operating system and typing over 1,000 words a minute. Specially crafted payloads written in a custom scripting language mimic a trusted human user while entering keystrokes at superhuman speed. It is named this way because if it quacks like a keyboard, then it must be a keyboard. You have the shell. You can type your way to success. You don't need a crafted overflow. Just type on the shell, and from the keyboard, you can always start a shell with Windows R in case you don't have one. And off you go. This is the full rubber ducky kit in its current version. First and third are parts to assemble it into a standard USB thumb drive case. while standard a few years ago. Now they may look different. The second is meant to enable keystroke injection on a micro USB device, effectively enabling HID attacks on Android smartphones. Then we have a USB adapter to load payloads into a micro SD card. You put the SD card into this adapter, plug it into your computer, load the payloads into a micro SD card like a drive, because with this adapter, a card looks like a drive. Then put the SD card back into the ducky. Now, when the ducky unit is plugged in, that SD card will look like a keyboard, or rather, that SD card will provide the keyboard with its input. And you can see what the rubber ducky looks like in the fifth part there on display. Closing in on the hardware. On the left is the micro SD card slot that conveniently lets you swap a library of pre-made payloads without having to load them every time. Just keep a library of cards. The replay button is in the center of the shot. This is convenient during development to avoid having to remove and replug the USB drive all the time. Your fingers will thank you because the edges of the PCB board are pretty sharp and they will cut you. But it's also good on the device, so you don't stress the solder joint between the PCB and the USB-A connector. The use of the button can also be redefined, although it is not accessible from outside the case. You need the case open to be able to see and operate the button. Finally, the LED up top lets you know when the payload is running. Green when it works, red when there is some issue. And again, the LED is also concealed when the case is closed. On the flip side, we have the Atmel AVR CPU powering the device and some support electronics. The pins on the left side should be a JTAG header, but I've never seen them used, so I'm not 100% sure. Okay, so let's look into the specs. The system is AVR powered. While it is not an Arduino in practice, it resembles it in many ways. The internal flash and RAM make board bring up simpler. If you're an embedded developer, you know what I'm talking about. And the potentially unlimited mass storage through the SD card interface make it extremely flexible in the kind of payloads it can carry. The LED can flash in multiple colors, signaling execution state or error during development. JTAG and GPIO access, combined with the standard Atmel DFU bootloader, make this a potentially moddable platform, but we haven't seen much hacking in terms of modifying the ducky itself because it is not a particularly cheap device. We usually see clones being developed instead rather than mods. So look, it's a keyboard. This is how Windows sees it. This is how the USB thumb drive looks like when you actually plug it in. Not that anybody is usually looking at the devices when you plug in something, but if you are, that's what you see. This is a Windows 10 system at the latest update level. All that Windows is going to do is warn you that it is configuring an existing driver the first time the device is plugged in. After that, it will never do anything. It will never tell you anything. And so you can see an overlay in the bottom right corner in the notification area close to the sys tray, but it doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't ask for anything. And in fact, this one-time message is self-dismissing. Once the configuration is done, it just disappears. So unless you're looking for it, you will not notice that there is this message, probably. By now, we have all understood that we have a rogue keyboard to do our bidding, but what can we do with it? So there are three primary attack vectors that we have to be concerned with. The first is file exfiltration. That is, copying files to a remote web server. The ducky is a keyboard. You don't copy files to a keyboard. So the keyboard, the ducky, is instructing the system to copy files to a remote drop in some bad part of the internet, anonymizing the attacker, but still providing retrieval ability at a later time. A second attack in the Windows environment is exfiltrating domain credentials and passwords as a default target. Even if encrypted, these are a prize target, as the attacker can brute force them offsite on his own time. And you can always get Wi-Fi passwords while you are at it. These are already in the clear in Windows. Just ask them with netshow, and Windows will tell you what the Wi-Fi passwords are. A third attack vector is initiating a reverse shell. And the ducky can start a reverse shell in just 3 seconds, beating any human user at this task. So now live, I would do a demo, but with one camera and having to switch to the Windows machine, it's a little bit difficult. So let me check. Yes, I have backup slides. So you will use the backup slides, showing you what the demo does. So the preamble is that all this stuff usually targets Windows, and I'm not a Windows guy. So I had to build a little dedicated setup in my lab with Acer Chromebooks, basically, but not Chromebooks, the ones that are equivalent level of cost, but meant for Windows. These machines can be infected with the horrible stuff we will see today, and I don't care. I can wipe them out, and if the compromise is such that even some more permanent part of the hardware is infiltrated, I don't have to worry. Those are basically my security lab, and they can get compromised, and it doesn't matter. There is no data there. But even without assuming the paranoid scenario that some attack could compromise firmware or the like, or create secret partitions or anything like that, just a very simple thing that you have the operating system and you have to rebuild to a clean state has definitely taught me something about Windows. I had to figure out how to do Windows backups and how to restore them from an independent boot device so that there would be no chain of compromise, again, presuming that the firmware is sane. So it was an interesting learning experience. It was extremely painful. I thought that by now backing up Windows from bare metal would be easier, but it's not as easy as it should be. In any case, I guess I learned something about Windows backups, which may be useful. But the reality is that some of these devices, like the Rubber Ducky, have a company behind them. So there is a reputation to defend, and I'm not terribly worried about the Rubber Ducky carrying some undisclosed evil payload. But others come from nameless sellers on Alibaba or eBay. Some of the devices we'll see are simply scary. Some are even known to phone home to unknown remote servers for reasons that so far we haven't been able to figure out yet. In any case, let's see what the Ducky does. But before we go there, there is TV appearance of the Ducky. So in an unprecedented feat of cinematic accuracy, the Rubber Ducky was apparently featured in an episode of Mr. Robot. Who knew Hollywood could get hacking right, even once? This is a rubber duck. Plug this guy in, wait 15 seconds, and yank it, okay? Thanks to a cool code called Mimikatz, it will pull all caches and the domain, and it will pull all passwords and the domain. Man, this guy speaks really fast, even for a hacker. Pull all passwords and domain info. Yeah. So it's almost correct. I'm not sure what happened there, but it is right. I guess they must have had an author that actually a technical reviewer that actually knew what was going, what hacking is for once. So here are the backup slides in lieu of demo. Here is basically what we would be doing if we were switching the HDMI feed to the external Windows guinea pig device and carrying out the attack there. Since switching devices drives the recording on Jabbers and up the wall, we're not going to do that. I promised a single stream. So we're going to do the screenshots instead. So the payload here is a very simple payload that basically just opens this file that is stored on the ducky. How do we do this? Payloads have to be encoded from duck code, which you see here in the window, into an inject.bin file that the USB thumb drive knee keyboard can execute. So here is a very simple example, a little bit more complicated than just the previous one, which is just basically opening a file with hello world, or hello scale was the name of the conference where this was used. This one is a little bit more complicated. It waits 1000 milliseconds. So it waits 1 second. It pressed the R key in the GUI. Then it waits 1/10 of a second. And it enters that URL string. So string is there as a type specification. It's just indicating that the following is a string. And then it's entering, it's pressing enter. So GUI R means Windows R. So that is a Windows run command for those of you that are Windows free. Windows R is the run prompt. And in Windows, when you type a web URL into the run prompt, it will look at the MIME type association for that URL. It will pop up the default browser, and it will go to that URL. So you don't need to go and say find the path to Chrome and launch Chrome. Windows will do that for you. You just need to say I want to go to this URL. The thing that's interesting about duck code is that it's actually quite high in usability, which is impressive because if you think about it, in our industry, only Apple gets usability consistently right, and maybe sometimes they are not perfect, but they are head and shoulders above everybody else. So how is it that everybody other than Apple cannot get UX right, but the people making hacking tools can? That's an interesting question for me. I would like to know the answer. But duck code is quite something because it is not designed as something that's convenient to encode into a computer. It's something that's designed as something that is convenient for somebody that's defining a sequence of keystrokes and making it easy for them. So it's a very intuitive, very straightforward thing, and it deals with things that that other people could trip on. I'm sorry. Was there a question?
No, someone
No,
knew and they weren't
maybe
muted.
somebody wasn't muted. Okay. So there are clones, as I mentioned before. The rise of the clones. According to what I like to call the Wally law of ecosystems, in an open system, success will bring what commercially people building a business like to refer to as freeloaders. So people that sell a product that was developed by somebody else. This is a very common scenario in open source, by the way. But it is a good sign of a healthy business when you have competitors. If you're the only one making a given thing, it means that the market that you're in is very small, or that you really have a killer patent, but that doesn't seem to happen in our industry. So in general, in the IT world, having competitors is a good sign that you have a healthy business. And so here the result is that there are hardware clones using the same or similar tool chains. The MicroDuck is a stealthy HID injector that can fit in the USB-A port itself. While Thomas's project is a $3 clone of a Ducky built using the Digistump DigiSpark platform and a tool called Duck2Spark. So you compile things using the Ducky tool chain and then convert it into the appropriate binary for a DigiSpark. This kind of development shows how active and vibrant the rubber ducky community is even after a decade. This is a very popular tool. And that goes back to my point about what a healthy ecosystem looks like. A more recent take on key injection was released not long ago on Crowd Supply, commissioned by Kevin Mitnick for a conference keynote and implemented by Olaf Tan and Dennis Go. This is a redesigned Ducky. The payloads in this case are written in Arduino. Bootloader access within the cable can be triggered by a magnet. Excuse me. And the Bluetooth remote endpoint is also available. This is effectively indistinguishable from a standard Apple charging cable. But equally nefarious micro USB versions are available. So these will perform keystroke injection attacks against a mobile device, or in the case of the USB cable, against a desktop just as well, or a tablet. And as you can see from the picture, you really can't tell anything about this cable. It looks like the standard. So what can we do to counter these attacks? Actually, let me see. After DEF CON, I realized that I left out one interesting thing. As some of you may be aware, the hacker community can be a little bit contentious. So this is Mitnick's cable. There is an equally famous hacker that goes by the shorthand MG. And he and Kevin have been trading barbs, and I'm going to get into that. But MG has developed his own cable. And his cable is also quite awesome. And I don't have the pictures here in the deck that I used for DEF CON, but I can show you because I have the cable. And if you can see it on camera, this one, since I have the Apple version of Mitnick's cable, I got the micro USB version of MG's cable. And similarly, you cannot see anything untoward here. Now, MG has done some quite interesting things with this cable. One that stands out to me is that it has geofencing capabilities. So, for example, in many of these devices, the question is, when do you trigger the payload? So geofencing on the cable is quite cool. The cable will become active only when it's within, I don't know, let's say that you're trying to breach Red Hat security and you've given me the cable. We're in Red Hat's Westford office. You would set the geofence to say this cable's payload will activate only when Federico is within 50 yards of Red Hat's office, so that the cable will be even harder to detect and idle effectively for all purposes when it's not here. MG has this interesting maniacal, I would say, attention for detail. And so there was this little tiny orange thing in the box, and it took me a while to figure out what it is. And basically, it's a clip that you put on the cable, because if you're working with multiple USB cables, you're going to have trouble figuring out which is which. Either for the purpose of identifying the which is loaded with which attack, or which cable is benign and which one isn't. So there are these 3D printed clips that are orange or a different color that he includes so that you can tag the cable while you're doing work and not get confused between different builds, which is, well, as I said, he is one for detail. There's a lot of stuff that the the OMG cable, as it's known, can do. And there are even versions that are designed for classroom use so that you can teach students how to craft these attacks if you're teaching a security class, and a bunch of other things. So it's the subject is not a closed subject. This came out, I think, in May this year. So there is innovation going on in this sector still. So what we were saying, what do we do to defend yourself against these things? So you do something like this. This is basic USB security. This is a device called a sync stop. As a CIO, you can buy a bucket of these, order that everybody in your organization use them, and don't worry, they still won't. But if you had any control of what the people in your organization do, this device cuts the data lines of a USB connection, preventing data siphoning at charging stations, which is the most likely scenario for somebody to give you a rogue USB connection. This is now known as the juice jacking attack. So if I'm charging anything at the airport's USB charging station or on the plane or anywhere that's not on my devices, it goes through this. So I'm sure I'm getting only power. If I'm plugging any of these rogue devices into my system to charge it, it also goes through this. So there is no data connection, and there is simply no reason to worry, period. Let me see what else. So you could still try to hack me through the voltage lines. I'm sure that they will figure it out at some point, but we're definitely not there yet. And I know that it sounds like a joke, but pretty much anything that connects into a device winds up being an attack vector at some point, as you can see from the current attacks against CPUs, and basically figuring out what the state of the CPU is by looking at what it's not saying. So I'm sure that someday voltage will be a problem. So far, I've seen only RFID attacks against cables with proximity. I haven't seen a way to inject messages into a cable. Maybe that's a military level kind of expertise, that it's not come down to a more normal industrial espionage level. But yeah, don't discount what people can do when they're highly motivated. So this device seems like basic prophylaxis. It is not always practical because it is stopping devices from providing you power from adding data on top of that. But in a lot of cases, we just want power, and this is fine. In a lot of other cases, we actually want data. This is a data bus, right? So a more customizable approach could be to build a device like USB Safe 2. Conceivably, when you control the firmware, you could choose what behavior to respond with. You could decide to filter on the class of the device, even the ID of the device, or some other property like the serial number. The current USB Safe 2 protects you from excessive voltage, which is limited to preset levels, and most interestingly, sets in software the data protection mode. This means we can choose where the data lines are connected or blocked in software, which is why I'm saying this could be an interesting platform to build something more complex on. This is an interesting idea. It would take a serious amount of effort if the value can be demonstrated. And you would need to add a full USB stack here that right now is not present. So it's not a trivial exercise, and the hardware would need revving, since But since pretty much every time I speak about this, someone asks me how I would do it, here is how I would do it. This is where I would start. The USB safe is also interesting to monitor what is actually going on in a USB chain, as it has independent LEDs for data and power lines. So you can see them here at the USB-A side of the board. You see those data and power labels. Up top and the bottom, the board is a two-layer sandwich. The LEDs are in the bottom layer. The single button up top in the middle of the picture controls the current level of voltage permitted and the data pass through or blocking behavior. So this is on the flip side, one toggle of the button. I'm sorry, one setting on the button is toggle, while the other is press and hold. And these modes are conveniently stenciled on the back. So you have the whole manual there. By the way, I don't think this will protect your electronics from a deliberate USB killer type of attack where a capacitor is wired into a USB device and discharges 200 volts to deliberately destroy whatever it is plugged into. But it will definitely help while you're developing your own electronics, as it stops over voltages up to 15 volts. So it protects you from your own snafus. Another company called Capable Robot has announced a programmable USB hub that has the ability to switch on and off power and data lines from software. They meant it as a way to plug and unplug misbehaving peripherals on a robot, or for hardware testing. So when something fails on the robot, turn it off, turn it back on, the ultimate in debugging. Or you have in your QA lab lots of units of a certain device and you need to power cycle them for testing. Depending on actual software implementation, this may be closer to what I was describing when it eventually ships. Of course, blocking by device ID, vendor ID, or serial number can be bypassed by any attacker privy to your security policy and willing to craft an attack against you. If they know what type of devices you're using in your office, they can make the rogue devices that they're using against you have that device or vendor ID. So to stop that, we would need cryptographic certificates. Which in turn require a managing authority actually willing to revoke the chain of trust of rogue players, which is not the USB forum. USB organization is just making a little bit of money by licensing trademarks and giving device vendor ID numbers out to individual vendors. They are not in the business of kicking vendors out. They're in the business of selling vendors ranges of the namespace. So I know that this may not be the ideal thing to say in a Linux environment, but I think that this can only be solved by Microsoft. Basically, you need somebody that's a big player, that's up in the chain, that doesn't care about revenue coming from the hardware, to be willing to tackle the thorny policy problem and say, no, this is a bad actor, we're going to blacklist them and forbid the use of that ID. It's a thorny policy problem. It's an expensive problem. It's a lot of work. And it comes with a lot of bad karma. So nobody has stepped up to it. But maybe we'll eventually have to. Another device getting even fancier here is called PISO. A similar thing, but instead of being a pass-through, this is a USB storage device. You have 3 buttons and a tiny OLED screen. Basically, it is a tiny Linux computer geared to providing more flexible storage than a plain card would. It is built on a Pi 0, so it cannot provide USB on-the-go behavior of switching between host and device. But it is still quite interesting. It comes with a kit of screws, and you combine it with a Pi Zero to produce a working computer. Think of it as a super flash drive built on a Pi Zero. It comes with a hardware kit to screw on the Pi Zero. In some versions, it includes a 3D printed cover to make it more robust and durable for everyday use. It's USB 2, and not much else to say there. I have not found an application for this yet, at least not an evil one. But here is an interesting idea. You can have a demo application that's a masquerading drive or a transforming drive. Press button 1, it provides you with the Arch Linux boot. Press button 2, now it's an Ubuntu boot ISO. Option 3, now it's Fedora. Option 4, now it's Kali. I don't know. It is cute. Conceptually, it is like the Tomu we have seen earlier, but now we are higher up the stack. We have all of Linux on the device, not just bare metal programming. And obviously, it is more powerful and has more storage. But this is the same button plus USB interaction model, supplemented with a tiny screen so it can talk back to you, at least a little. Let's go back to evil things, where we left the ducky. For pen testers, the solution is to get in. That's what they're paid for. They have a contract to do it. So they get in, they put a few plants on the right machines, and when some of you log in the morning, they are in. Besides, your machines are not patched, usually. So it's too easy. It's like shooting fish in a barrel. But it gets worse. At some point, someone realized that different classes of USB devices have different inherent permissions. For example, a storage class device may get different access from a network card. So enter the Bash Bunny, the grown-up sibling of the rubber ducky. This one, same vendor, by the way, can do the on-the-go behavior we were discussing earlier on steroids. This USB stick can show up as a storage device. A minute later, it is a network card, and then it can become a keyboard. It keeps connecting and disconnecting to change the driver, the driver it talks to, if it needs to. Because different classes have different capabilities and different implicit or explicitly granted trust. What is absolutely amazing to me is that in our industry, where basically no one can get UX right, basically unless you work for Apple, your product sucks. Usability, these security products are amazing. They're actually really easy to use. So, as I said before, I don't understand why they can get UX right and no one else can, but it's amazing to me. So the specs on this hardware are absolutely impressive. Quad-core CPU, 0.5 gig of RAM, 8 gigs of storage. The interesting attack vector, additional attack vector enabled by the Bash Bunny is to show up as a network device. So you plug in, advertise a very fast route with fantastic metrics. You can do this so that the right network driver is already there in Windows by default. So there is no permission or approval required. It will just be auto-configured. And now you can get the system to route all network traffic of the machine into this fake network that apparently you told the machine has amazing performance compared to anything else on Earth. Now, as traffic comes into your device in the fake network, you can inspect it before forwarding it out through the normal interface so that it actually reaches its intended destination. You're inspecting all of the machine's network traffic, but no one monitoring the corporate network ever sees what you're doing because it is happening on localhost. It's not where their network monitoring equipment is looking. There are lots of exploits that are already being written for the Bash Bunny, so you do not even need to put in the effort to code them, which is scary. You get in the network path as the default route, then you are nice and you let them see the internet just so that you don't, and so they don't notice you're actually there. A different take on the theme is the Cactus WHID. This one includes a Wi-Fi access point, so your HID attack is no longer blind. we're looking for all intensive purposes to a hardware remote shell. Note the case it ships in. It ships with. Once it's locked, it cannot be opened without breaking it. It seals. But it ships open for inspection, which is great for our pictures. So we can take pictures without breaking it until we decide to lock it up. As you can see, the Wi-Fi part of the device is powered by the inevitable ESP8266. And to facilitate the process of weaponizing USB gadgets, you can wire another USB device's pins to the pads on the bottom left here. The new attack vector that you're seeing here is that you go on eBay and you get a USB-powered knick-knack like a plasma globe or a Nerf gun turret, and you wire the data lines into this. Pass through the power from the host device you're parasitizing so that there is power here and the host device is supplying it. Now you have a plasma globe with a big company name on it. And it is basically a social exploit without the social. You just mail it to them. You got the plasma globe from Hewlett-Packard. Congratulations. They don't know that it doesn't come from HP. You just bought it off eBay and then you sent it over. So beware unexpected devices in the mail. There are the new hardware-enabled spear phishing. This seems already bad enough, but fear not, it gets worse. Now, this is actually rather outrageous, and it is making me lose faith in the concept of computer security as a whole, to be honest. Why bother hacking you with a device if I can hack you with a cable? From the picture, it looks like it is a big cable, but it is actually a rather tiny cable. And yeah, it has something at its hand. This something is actually a GSM phone. It gets power from the USB connection. This is potentially a phone with an infinite battery, as long as it's plugged into something that has USB power indefinitely. The device itself is marketed as a location tracker and usable in cars, where a thief would not be able to identify the USB cable as a location tracking device. And now this is absolute nonsense. The device has poor tracking precision you would never find in the car, and makes no mention of tracking in its packaging. So is it a device to protect your car? No, it is a high-speed data and charging cable. It says so right there. I also want to highlight how the packaging is designed to be opened and closed without trace, not something that's common for blister shipping hardware. This is because you need to add a SIM card to the cable to make it active and able to get on the phone network. In this manner, the cable can be delivered to the target still in its packaging. And it gets worse. Didn't I say it would? It does. You can buy this monstrosity for $9.85 on eBay with free shipping. Or you could. I have to say that they have cleaned up their act recently. But when I prepared the presentation, eBay, Alibaba, and Amazon were all carrying this cable. So are we worried yet? Okay, let's all take a deep breath. What in the heck is going on here? This is not only evil, it is also cheap. You would think that if you use this to spy on someone, at least in the United States, you should go to jail for unauthorized wiretapping. But the device is effectively just a phone in a ridiculous form factor, so it's probably legal for Amazon and Alibaba to sell it. Cory Doctorow calls it trickle-down surveillance because it is apparently a low-quality, low-cost copy of a device the NSA had in their leaked tailored operations catalog, codenamed Cottonmouth. Now, the cable itself looks like this. A ribbon USB cable with a USB-A connector on one end and a micro USB on the other. Some folks have pictured it next to an Amazon Basics charging cable, and the size of the connector is frankly not that strange. For doing this in person, I would hand you the cable so that you can inspect it and see that it doesn't really scream that anything is amiss. But unfortunately, we're still in the lockdown mode, so some other time. In the meantime, trust me, it does not stand out. Until it is fielded for use and the casing is super glued as one does, the cover slides off to reveal a small board. This is a GSM listening and location device hidden inside the plug of a standard USB data charging cable. It supports the 850, 900, 1800, and 1900 megahertz GSM frequencies. The cover of the USB-A side slides off, so you can add a micro SIM card in the slot. The end cap of the USB-A plug locks in place so that folks do not find out accidentally there is a phone in the cable you've just given them. It can do a bunch of things. It can track the location of the cable. It does not have GPS, so it won't give you a too precise a location. We're looking at tower triangulation with a service like Skyhook Wireless or the mobile carrier's own advertising data facility. Let's say that we're looking at roughly a mile plus or minus in precision, with a more densely populated area likely delivering better resolution as the tower density increases. It has a microphone. It can listen to what you're saying. It has a collection of AT commands so that you can configure it. It can send text messages, tell you where it is. And you can text to the cable to change its mode of operation. And it even has a decibel trigger mode. It can call you when it hears a sound over 40 decibels, so you can listen in to what's going on. The chip is a MediaTek CPU that does not have a published spec sheet. It is believed to be a chip designed for low-cost smartwatches. And there is a serial port that shows the initial bootloader sequence, but once it goes past the bootloader, it is no longer configured for the kernel to go to serial. So the kernel does not post messages there. This device has undocumented commands that nobody knows what they do and sends packets to places in China that we do not exactly understand, but presume are used for the geolocation service. Never, ever plug this device or any other kind of crap like this into a computer and that you trust, unless it is a secured lab facility. And as I said before, you consider that computer a sacrificial object that's not going to be used for anything else. Here is the view inside the case. As best as we can tell, the USB lines bypass the device itself and go back to the cable, save of course for stealing a little bit of juice off the wire. The mini SIM card reader is in the center. This device is quite finicky about the SIM cards it will accept. On the right, you can see the electric microphone commonly found in any standard USB charging cable. Not. On the flip side, we find the pads to the serial port conveniently labeled. So bonus points for that. The MediaTek CPU is in center stage. And similar logic, we are going to skip the demo here. But a couple of considerations. There is one thing, this particular device is actually relatively safe to speak about because it's increasingly harder to make it work in the United States because G2 networks in the United States have been shut down, right? AT&T shut down its G2 network. GSM service is no longer available as a result. For demos, I thought I could get around using a T-Mobile that should still be running a GSM network, but I could not get the device to join the network. It's really hard to debug a headless device, so it's no fun. So I first thought that maybe the limited antenna and low transmission power could be the issue, but then I went outdoors. That didn't seem to change anything. There did seem to be T-Mobile coverage. There are other networks, maybe for IoT data transmission that still cover GSM protocol, but it's increasingly unlikely that you'll be able to make a G2 network work in the United States and in several parts of Europe, as the space, the hardware, and ultimately the spectrum is being reclaimed. But in China, there are newer wireless protocol versions of this cable. It does look like eBay and Amazon are not selling those. They improve their filtering, and they're not carrying that. Alibaba, as usual, carries anything that's manufactured in its own country, so probably you can find at least G3 networks compatible versions there, which would work on anything currently in existence. I haven't tried, but that is likely possible. This also came to fame a few months ago. MG, the hacker that I was mentioning before for the ONG cable, was looking at pictures of a wiretapped phone that had been suspected of having been wiretapped by Russian security services, and basically the battery had been replaced with a smaller battery to make room inside the phone. And inside the phone was a board that looks suspiciously like this. So it seemed like a little bit odd that the nation state would use this kind of low-cost technology to jury-rig a wiretap, but apparently it's happening, or somebody did it. We don't really know who does these things because they don't come out and announce it. But there are examples of this happening in the wild, even in high-profile political cases, apparently. Okay, so what does this operation look like? If we were running the cable, here's what you would have seen. The cable is in use, meaning it's powered. It should not matter if a battery or a wall power source is in use. Now we can do multiple things. The coolest of these is making a phone call to the cable. The hacker over there knows the phone number of the cable, and she dials it. On this side, the cable picks up the call, starts sending back what the microphone can hear until she hangs up. Not bad for a start. But we are trendy, and we can do something more. We text the implant next. After the hacker sends the 3-letter command LOC in a text message to that same number, she will get the text message back geolocating the phone to a city in the world, Westford, Massachusetts, and including a link to a page on a site called gpsui.net, showing a map of the appropriate position with roughly 1 mile accuracy. Another interesting text message is 1111, 4 ones. This activates a mode in which the implant will call the attacker back if the noise at the location exceeds 40 decibels. Perhaps a conversation is underway and they can eavesdrop. A security analyst named Mitch dissected the implant a few years ago. I think it was 4 years ago, maybe 5. It's been a while. And you can find more details in his write-up. He went really deep into the hardware. So in closing about this, obviously doing this is in violation of US laws requiring 2 parties to be aware a call is going on, or both parties having to consent to a conversation being recorded, and probably a bunch of other things. Please don't do anything like this. It is a crime in most US states. Clearly, we have rules about this not being acceptable, but what is changing is that folks willing to break the law can do so with a very low barrier to entry, namely $25 on Amazon or eBay. Before, you had to go to some black market purveyor of illicit goods, who knows where, in the back of Tony Soprano's restaurant or something. And you had to find out who they were in the first place, which hopefully would have had a high probability of getting you on the radar of law enforcement. Now you can just go on Alibaba and have them express delivered to you for free. I'm not impressed. This is not what the future should look like. I I know that I'm not going to say that we don't have bigger problems, but so let's go back to the security aspect. We were joking about the fact that it was easy to break in, but realistically, this is physical access. If you have a device, then you can do things to it. That's a first rule of computer security. In some of the devices that I've shown you, we can also attack the device over Wi-Fi. Fine. And that hardly matters. What matters is that this brings the lost USB key attack to a new level. In a military base, people are trained to shoot on sight when they see a USB key. But in a company setting, people are much more lax. They find the USB thing, let's look at it and see who do we need to return this to. Who lost it? I am amazed this sort of thing exists and is being produced on any sort of scale. I paid almost nothing for this device. So this is something new to be on the lookout and on the lookout for if you work in any sort of operational capacity in a security sensitive industry. Now let's put this in economic terms, or in MBA terms. Let's dumb it down a little. Things change when you drop the cost of doing something by a factor of 10. Think of the Raspberry Pi. We went from $300 computers to $30 computers, and the Pi Zero showed the right kind of thinking, at least in the MBA sense of that, and it did another almost 10x drop, going to $5, I think. This cable is dropping the cost of data exfiltration or surveillance or covert activity or industrial espionage to the point where everybody can afford it. I'm not going to say we do not have bigger problems, but this is not nice. Cheaper industrial espionage is not in the positive column of Progress's ledger. This is why any place that then is any kind of real security should be pouring glue in their USB ports. There is no other reasonable solution. You can put locks on the USB ports. You can buy those, and they look very cute. Attackers will find a way to break them, or your employees will break them for the attacker out of convenience. Yeah, we really need the USB port, and this guy in IT doesn't want to let me use it. The only real solution to make USB safe is not to use it. Barring that, you need to work to limit the blast radius of a breach. Realistically, the only reason why USB security is not a bigger issue today is that we're so bad at network security that it's easier and cheaper to exploit you remotely. That's why people are not bothering to attack you with a USB device. It's like trying to distribute viruses over floppies. Why would we need that? We can just embed them in some website, and when you visit the website, break the browser and go from there. Much cheaper, more effective, faster. Same kind of logic here. So USB security is completely broken, but the hackers are better avenues right now. That's the only thing that is preventing this from being exploited in mass. But when somebody is tailoring an attack for you, this is absolutely a viable strategy. It is an obvious strategy, actually, which is not a comforting thought, because they are not tailoring an attack for you personally. They're more likely tailoring an attack to exfiltrate data from your employer. So maybe there is really no hope. So even the people in charge of protecting White House data can't seem to get this message. But I choose to remain an optimist. So, final reminder, use a sync stop. Put one in your travel bag. Put one in your computer bag. Sync stop or any trusted brand of these. Do not buy an anonymously supplied no-name sync stop, because who knows what's in it. This is a reconstruction of a tweet that was posted at Scale 16 in Pasadena a few years ago. Someone ran to their session and forgot their iPhone charger on the main hall. Where the hallway track where everybody is saying hi, the social track of the conference, or the hallway track as we call it. The conference Twitter lit up with folks thinking this was a honeypot attack. So perhaps there is hope after all, at least some people get it. On that thought, that is what I have. This ends the 101. I hope some of you better than me at embedded development have additional ideas or can suggest new tricks or additional devices that you've seen in the Q&A. As usual, this is my contact info. And that's that.
Okay, thank you, Federico. I found that very, very interesting. I had a bunch of those. I didn't have the StopSync brand, but I had similar ones, and they really worked great. I don't know where they went since I've moved a couple of times since I bought them.
So let me see. Okay, if I'm back on full screen, I can try to show you. Well, there isn't a whole lot to show, but I got this yesterday, which is a tutorial on how to using USB guard. On Linux, there is a tool called USB guard, so that you can configure USB stack to only allow USB connections from devices that are known device ID or known device type. So you can effectively do on a Linux host the kind of security that I was advocating. You would want some kind of sync stop with a USB stack would be able to provide you with. Again, that doesn't stop a tailored attack against you, but it stops a generic attack because you can basically say, I know the device IDs of the devices that are usually on my network. I am going to block everything else. And as an administrator, you can enforce that policy on your users. And other USB devices simply will not get a USB stack connection to complete. So it doesn't matter what the device is masquerading as, it just can't connect to the host. So Linux has a solution for this. I'm not sure if there is a similar Windows solution that has emerged since I last looked. I'm not aware of one, but if there is one, and that would be interesting to know. Again, these are not things that are interesting to stop a tailored attack, which is typically what's going to happen with a USB device. They're coming after you or your employer specifically. So generically blocking things probably is, but it's a start. It's better than nothing.
So Federico, how did you do that picture-in-picture thing during your slides?
If when you're in screen share, right. So first I started sharing my screen, and then I went back to the Jitsi window and I clicked on the camera icon and manually started the camera again. So starting the screen share automatically turned off the camera. Then I forced it back on by clicking on the camera again.
Go to the Jitsi settings.
Yeah, that's a fairly new feature of Jitsi. I think we used it last time or on one of my other meetings.
Okay, when I click on the little pop-up thing for the camera on the bottom bar, it just shows me the two different cameras, the webcam I have on USB and the built-in camera in the laptop, which is inaccessible since the lid's closed. I don't see any picture-in-picture thing on it.
Yeah, there is no explicit setting. Basically, all that I did was click on the camera to restart it.
Oh, so you're doing screen share and then you just click on the camera icon in the little bottom bar?
Exactly.
Okay, I'll have to give that a try. Okay. I'm glad to hear it's a Jitsi feature, not a feature of Windows 10.
Well,
Okay.
this machine is actually an old Mac, so
Yeah.
Hey, Federico, I have a question. So imagine you have one of these cellular cables that are, maliciously transmitting your thing. Can you? It would be interesting to think of a device that detects cellular signals and tells you when something is happening that you don't expect it. Have you ever looked into something like that?
yeah, I did. But eventually, it looked like I was going to expand the scope of the talk indefinitely because there is a lot of devices here already. But I did do that. The US is actually a relatively honest place, despite what Facebook is turning the country into. But just in terms of industrial security, if you look at places like China or Russia, companies spying on other companies is an extremely common thing. And it appears that in Russia, basically the way they protect themselves from this is that they hire retired security services personnel, and they become head of security in a large company, kind of what we do here with ex-military, right? The difference is that they don't use them only for defensive operations, they also use them for offensive operations against their competitors. So there is a pretty evolved landscape of industrial espionage going on both there and in China, where companies are spying on each other using voice, data, anything you can possibly imagine, and even things that are classified like Tempest type attacks, so electromagnetic signal leak. So as you can imagine, there is also an industry to defend from these. So if you go to Alibaba, you can find all sorts of devices that are meant to discover bugs. So bugging someone's phone, or now I guess having a bug that is also a cell phone, are pretty old attacks. And so there are devices to do a security sweep of a room and find electromagnetic signals. Where do they come from? What's going on here? Of course, the device can be laying dormant, so that makes things more interesting. These devices also have other things. They have pretty simple, but perhaps better than nothing, optical ways to look for camera lenses, because wiretapping often will involve cameras. So they're looking for the glint of reflection that a lens always has. And I even tested them, but there are all sorts of these devices to look for wiretapping listed up on Alibaba, or maybe some of them are on eBay, but I saw the main collection on Alibaba. There are a lot of societies, China being a very notable one, where everything is on camera, everything is recorded by the state, and that is legal. But there is a lot of recording going on that is not legal by rogue actors, and so the security team of a company has to basically do what we would do when we're protecting a government official, and we have them in a skiff for certain types of meetings or certain phone calls, and they have to deal with this for maybe just an industrial chemical company. It's crazy, but it's the way it is. So there are a lot of these devices. I think the obvious targets are EM emissions. The idea about spotting camera lenses is also interesting. I think that on the EM front, obviously the device will lay dormant if it at all can. So the simpler devices that have a live connection to the phone network, you can catch because they're always pinging back and forth. Another device that may be more opportunistic and establish a connection only when it has something to send, may be more complicated. I think, yeah, it gets incrementally more complex depending on what the attack is, but it is possible. And there are relatively cheap spectrum analyzers that you can use for software-defined radio, which would be a completely different talk, not security related, but just figuring out how you can do software-defined radio. There are wonderful tools there, but you can listen to the spectrum of what's going on in your immediate vicinity and try to detect that. I think that it's difficult to distinguish the mobile phones in the pockets of the people in your entourage or in your visitors' entourage from rogue devices. Maybe you have to let them leave mobile phones at the entrance if you want to establish a secure perimeter of that kind. But you can do something. It's not a one size fits all. So you will need to have multiple defense strategies. Going back to the OMG cable by MG, I think that he has a device that's also meant to test cables to see if they are active. So that will not catch 100% of rogues, but it will basically let you discover if a cable becomes active with no reason, right? The cables are supposed to be inert. They're not supposed to initiate a connection on their own or to transmit data on their own. So you can plug these suspect devices into MG's detector and see if they do anything. If they do, then there are two possibilities. Either it's a rogue cable, or it's a cable that has some more advanced functionality. There are a lot of USB. Well, they're not cables at the point; they're dongles, right? And so they have some chip in the dongle that is performing some function, and you are correctly detecting them. Except that they're not all rogue. Some of them may be doing something beneficial, like translating one version of USB into I don't know, mini DisplayPort, or who knows. So as usual, it's complicated, but there are a bunch of things that you can do, and the superset of these maybe can form a strategy.
Well, that was a fascinating and comprehensive answer, though. Just want to say.
It would be easier if there was a simple answer, but yeah. The complicated answer is interesting. So, Kurt, are you here to heckle me? Sounds like Kurt is not prepared to speak.
I think he fell asleep. He's getting old.
Aren't we old? Aren't we all?
Well, these cables are fascinating, but you work for a prominent North American Linux vendor.
Right.
Have you ever heard of these, attacks in the wild? As far as you've been aware of?
So I work on storage. So my level of security paranoia is of a different kind, and it's usually on the TCP network. And there is paranoia going on because my storage product is a distributed product with many machines, but I don't have to deal with these. I've not seen this going on, but I'm not on the RHEL security team. They see things that are wild, and when I'm called in to consult on architectures that involve multiple products for the federal government, the things that we're defending against are just sheer lunacy. Are like we're like, is this requirement for real, or did they just dream it up? Like sometimes we cannot even imagine what the attack vector that we're trying to defend against is. And when you're working with the government, they can only tell you so much, right? So they just go, you have to stop this. It's like, but why would you do that? And so without knowing what the attack is, it gets very interesting, but in a confusing way. Yeah, I'm working on one of those right now, and the stuff that we're coming up with is just nuts. But it's not a hardware issue. They audit their own hardware, so they're telling us the hardware is safe. We just have to worry about that.
Thank you.
Well, it keeps things interesting. And I think that the fact that we don't get the details is also effectively a measure for our own protection, because nobody can go and perform what Bill Ricker calls rubber hose cryptanalysis. They cannot go and beat the details out of us because we don't have them. So it may be difficult to work this way, but it's also safer.
Yeah, Ricker didn't show up tonight.
And we still need to find speakers for November and December.
You need help recruiting somebody?
Yeah, right now I don't really have any ideas for what to do, talk about.
Jonathan, I should send an email to Jonathan, the space guy, and see what he has. He's got a bunch of interesting talks. He was very busy last summer, and he said let him know in the fall.
There should be a pretty interesting thing that he can explain. So if you have been reading the news, there last few days there was this report that China may have tested the hypersonic weapon. That's all that the news says, but that makes it sound absolutely awesome and terrifying, and that's all that makes the news. But the hypersonic weapon basically means that you're launching something at orbital speeds, and so the titles were very sensational. The newspaper I've seen this on was a British newspaper that's somewhat on the alarmist side of the scale. And so they're like, this has never been done before. And I was like, oh, come on. This has been done in 1965, the first time by the Russian military. And
what is the newspaper?
The way you do this is basically that you launch. The newspaper is the Telegraph. But there were reports elsewhere of this hypersonic weapon test. But hypersonic weapon means that you put something in orbit and you deorbited it, which is something that a lot of nations have done plenty of. The question that how you do it as a weapon is that you need to deorbit with precision. That's the problem that the Soviets could not solve in the 70s. Also, the Soviets had 10,000 weapons, so they're like, we don't need to figure out this problem. We can just launch 10,000. But in terms of creating strategic asymmetry, and in terms of creating something that's not nuclear, hypersonic weapon is interesting. So what is it? You launch this thing on an orbital trajectory. You literally put it in orbit, but probably at low altitude, maybe 150 kilometers, something where an orbit would not be sustained for more than a few days. But you don't care because you're not planning to complete even your first orbit. You do 3/4 of an orbit or however far you need to go before you reach your target, and then you deorbit over your target. Okay. So this is called a fractional orbit bombardment system, FOBS. And it was first created by the Russians in 1965 and made operational in 1971. Now, the reason why I'm bringing up Jonathan here is that when you put something up in orbit, Spacewatch issues numbers for it. So the Chinese test, whatever the test was, Space Watch, the US Space Command, issued two numbers for these things. I suppose one was the warhead and the other one was the launcher. And they were like, orbital elements pending. We'll see them later. When we see a few orbits, we'll tell you what the orbital elements are. There was no orbit. There was the launch, and then they disappeared. So it's very unusual to see Space Watch numbers not go forward. There were these two numbers. They're like reserved, and then whatever next launches happen. And then the numbers for these launches slid back by 2 because the other 2 objects disappeared. So it was very unusual, and it kind of called a lot of attention if you watch space catalog launches, because it's like, what happened? Why did these things suddenly change number? That never happens. So it's interesting. If you bring Jonathan, I want his story on this.
Yeah, I'll try to bring Jonathan in the next couple of months. Shankar is asking a question. Can you see the chat panel?
I have it somewhere. Participants open. Yes. Okay, so Shankar, the Mint is not cooperating, but I wanted to ask if there have been any further reports of such eavesdropping devices being snuck in via supply chain attacks. To be honest, I haven't been looking, but I didn't see anything. There were reports of supply chain attacks against Supermicro servers. I think it was 2 years ago. It's still an unresolved question, and I don't know. I don't know what it means. Certainly, there are supply chain attacks against hardware. That there is no doubt about that. But they're usually highly targeted. The Supermicro one is the only one that went into the public sphere because Bloomberg reported it. Now, I'm usually very critical of news media. I think that they have a lower standard for what they do than just about anybody except maybe actually, that's not fair. The people that pick up the garbage have higher standards. So news media is basically, I have 350,000 planes that took to the air today, and I'm not going to report that it's good and everything is fine. And yay, we have chairs in the sky for 1 million people. I'm going to report that one plane crashed, and that is what I'm going to hammer on for a week. Now, I understand that the media has a watchdog function, and the fact that they report on the one crashing plane makes the world better. But the fact that they are obsessive about finding things going wrong and not reporting on the things going right is skewing the world into an excessively pessimistic view. And now that the media is not about getting TV subscriptions or things that people have to be relatively comfortable with, if you have somebody obnoxious on the TV all day, most people will tune them off. It's just, can I clickbait you into clicking? It's really absolutely ridiculous. Now, with that baseline, I am very, very picky about the news that I read, and I do read Bloomberg because I think that their reporting is among the best among US news. However, I don't know how good or bad the reporting on this thing was, because the reporter that came up with this, I think, wrote 2 articles about it. He has not retracted the story. Bloomberg has not retracted the story, but everybody involved, government, Supermicro, everybody else has said, no, this didn't happen. So I'm pretty sure that there are supply chain attacks going on, because that's an obvious thing. We know that the NSA has been doing that kind of thing to other countries because of leaks that's been shown. So we know that that is going on at high levels in terms of non-bloody warfare between global powers. But in terms of things being in the server that you mail order and into your data center, I think that's somewhat doubtful, especially because when you get found out, that problem has to get fixed. So putting something in all Supermicro servers looks like a really stupid thing to do, because you're compromising your ability to play this game. So one equally possible theory about Supermicro is that somebody wanted to depress the Supermicro stock price, and they did. Their stock price was less than half than what it used to be for more than a year. And then eventually it went back to where it was afterwards. So I don't know what's the truth about the Supermicro thing specifically. It's an interesting one because it's murky and it involves people that usually do a good job about reporting, but reporting things that don't seem convincing or don't make sense. So maybe the sources weren't good enough. Who knows? There are supply chain attacks going on, but they haven't been reported after this one, perhaps because this one was likely a dud of a story. So maybe people are a little bit careful now. Who knows? It seems to me that basically any sort of scarecrow-mongering kind of story gets to the news because there is no cost. You can retract it the day after in the worst case scenario if you're worried about a lawsuit. So I don't think that's a sufficient deterrent. But one way or another, they haven't popped up. So no, I haven't seen anything. Specifically about microphones, I have absolutely seen nothing. The ones like the Supermicro one are network taps. They're not audio taps. But there are a different family of audio related things that's been appearing, which is talking to voice assistants remotely. You can Alexa. I forget what Apple's Siri capable speaker is called, and then the Google Home. All of these devices tend to use MEMS type microphones. So there are some semiconductor chips that, well, they're not chips. Maybe they are chips, but there are semiconductors that act as microphones. They're not something like an electret microphone or a cardioid or anything that we would recognize as a microphone. They just look like a chip on a board. You can excite these microphones with a laser. So there is academic research and there are published papers. I think I've seen one out of Israel, and I don't remember where the other ones come from, where basically people can point a laser at the Google Home from a couple hundred yards away and modulate voice into the voice assistant. And because typically we don't require password authentication for these devices, you can issue commands. In fact, I think one of the big selling points of a voice assistant is that it does not require authentication, right? If I tell my mobile phone, hey Siri, when is my next meeting? My mobile phone answers, you have to unlock the iPhone first. But if I tell my speaker, hey Siri, when is my next meeting? It knows it's in my home. It considers itself secure if it was configured that way, and it will just tell me, which is a heck of a lot more helpful than not telling me when is my next meeting. But because these devices are often passwordless, the fact that you can have a voice channel into them remotely is a new avenue of attack. That's the most interesting thing I've heard that was voice-based. Sure. Thank you, Shankar. There is Jan is saying that wireless keyboards and mice are very risky, and actually he is right. I've actually seen some, I think it was a Microsoft wireless keyboard, and don't quote me on that, but I think it was Microsoft. A few days ago in Best Buy that was labeled saying that there was a certain level of crypto encoding between the dongle and the keyboard. Generally speaking, that is an important reassurance when they're using a proprietary protocol between the dongle and the keyboard. It shouldn't be so much of a concern if you're using a standard Bluetooth, because obviously the Bluetooth stack has to be secure for other reasons. Never mind the fact that it's been broken a million times, but it needs to be secured one way or another because you're carrying a Bluetooth device all the time around. So assuming that problem is solved, the Bluetooth keyboard would also be fine. But in many cases, there are these proprietary device protocols for mouse and keyboard, because we want the mouse and keyboard to run for a year on very little power. So you can't do that with Bluetooth, even Bluetooth LE, I don't think. So that's the impetus for a custom thing.
I just want to say it's interesting that when you have a very low power, low sophistication device, you can trust it a bit more, because when you program it, you assume the bootloader is very unsophisticated and you have full control of the device. But then once it gets more complicated, all of a sudden you can't trust it. You know, and that's where, you know, if it was free software like our, you know, GNU Linux distributions, maybe, but maybe you could trust it more. So someday we're gonna see what Red Hat Linux on these cables. You're gonna be selling these things, right?
Maybe. Who knows? But the thing is this. Yes, there is some. So there are two things there. One is complexity, obviously breeds more places where attacks can be hidden. But complexity usually arises because you're trying to make the world safer from the simpler attacks, right? So if you have a keyboard that's just transmitting analog signals to the device, to use the example from before, you can basically eavesdrop on that with an oscilloscope. So you go and add multiple layers on the stack, because you're not going to code crypto directly on bare metal. And so that adds the complexity. You're protected from the previous attack, but now you have the additional complexity of all these layers. And then more difficult attacks come in. I think it's fine. I mean, the world doesn't need to be 100% secure. It's interesting for us intellectually to discuss what it takes to protect things. But unless you are responsible for a nuclear power plant or an ICBM, things don't need to be 100% secure, because usually a failure is not that terrible. You have to choose a threat profile that's suitable for the information being protected. Now, granted, I think our industry and all industries that depend on ours is not doing a good enough job. If you look at T-Mobile, they have a data leak every year, regularly, like clockwork. Then they apologize. Oh, I'm sorry, we leaked all the data of all our customers. Next year, let's do it again. I don't understand exactly what's going on there. It's embarrassing enough when Yahoo did it once. T-Mobile does it every year. And so then you go to officials, which is the place where it's really secure. I think most of the banks have their act together because they don't want to lose money. There is a serious impact there in the pecuniary sense. But the credit rating agencies, they take care of our data as if it was recycled paper. I mean, they just lose it with no regard, rhyme or reason. Oh yes, we leaked all your data. We're going to give you a $15 coupon for identity protection for a year. Okay, I think at some point, the problem is that there is no standard threat profile defined by the law. One thing is for a company to say, I'm going to need to protect the data to this level because I'm not going to leak who my customers are, for example. I'm not going to leak data of these types because regulation says that I cannot. Like banks cannot lose data about their accounts. They have to have them for the lifetime of the account plus, I don't know, 20 years. It's something unbelievably long. And there are real consequences to losing that, so banks don't lose it. But in many industries, this is undefined, and not having a threat profile defined by a regulator, I mean, it doesn't need to be Congress, but at least an industry group, if you don't want regulation. Let's have the industry group of whoever is in charge of credit rating to define a standard. You have to protect the identity of citizens, well, of anybody that you're credit rating. up to this level, and everybody has to meet it. And there are a lot of standards that don't come from the government, and they're equally useful, like, I don't know, MPAA movie ratings. The fact that we don't have those means that all that these vendors do is say, oh, we leaked data, we apologize, we are preparing for the class action suit where the attorney that crossed the line first and got appointed the defender of the class is going to get $200 million. And all of you are going to get $5 plus a coupon for defense of your data for a year. That doesn't work on multiple levels. So there have to be standards. There have to be consequences for the company, and they don't need to involve yachts for parasite lawyers. They have to involve some tangible consequence for the company that makes it so the company doesn't do it. And the company needs to know what the target that they're aiming for is, because they cannot aim for a fuzzy cloud where they get criticized for leaking, parking information. Federico is a reserved parking spot in Westford. Is that a problem? Maybe it is. Maybe it's not. Define a threat profile, decide that it is protected information or not. So to be fair to the companies, there has to be that kind of target. Now, the other thing here is in terms of the analog versus non-analog, there is a lot of data leakage out of simple devices, unfortunately. So while complexity is a problem because it breeds places to hide things in, and then it breeds the problem of securing the supply chain, simplicity usually is no defense either. And then I appreciate the enthusiasm for open source, but open source has a different problem. So if you have a proprietary supplier, we don't know what's in their code. So until somebody breaches them, we don't know what's in the proprietary stack that could have been dangerous. And with the exception of very few people, like the US government and the Chinese government can look at Microsoft's code in sealed rooms where they cannot take any of the code out. They can go and read the code and decide, yes, okay, we trust this code. But for the rest of us, that's not possible. You would think that open source would be fine, but the problem is that, yes, for something that's high value, you can hire an open source vendor and say, here are the bits from Red Hat. They are trusted. We looked into them. Here are the bits from Ubuntu. They are trusted. We looked into them. And they're signed, and you allegedly know what's in them. But if you look at most web applications, they're built with things that don't come out of the Linux vendor. They come out of GitHub repositories. Or actually, it's not GitHub, it's Node, right? It's which is now a property of GitHub, so I suppose I'm right. But a lot of things are built with Node repositories that nobody has any idea where they come from, who owns them, or what. And when you start auditing the chain of a web application, usually you have a chain of 200 dependencies, at least, going from one library to the next library. This other library chains into another thing. For an embedded developer, it's kind of crazy. You're using high-level languages and chaining like this. The amount of performance that you're wasting is unbelievable. But they're not there for performance. They're there for speed to market. So what do people want to code in? Electron, Node. Okay. And those are not optimized applications, but they're easy to develop in. And Node in particular brings in a crazy number of dependencies. But I don't want to pick on Node specifically. There are lots of JavaScript, or you can do the same thing with Python, frankly. You can bring in lots of dependencies from pip. Nobody has ever looked at those. All that it says is, yeah, somebody put this library on pip, and Federico trusted Kurt's library, and Jerry trusted Federico's library, and up the stack, you have 10 layers. At some point, Federico retires. He is tired of maintaining this time zone library, and the guy that takes over maybe puts something in the time zone library. So unless you're willing to audit all of that, there is a problem even with open source. And with open source, the problem is that nobody is paying for that auditing to happen because it's very labor intensive, and what you deliver on the other end must be very cheap. So I think that the economic problem is on the open source side. The transparency problem is on the closed software side. So on the proprietary software side. So yeah, it's an issue. It is definitely an issue. But supply chain attacks now are in the forefront, not just in hardware, but especially in software. So this will have to be addressed somehow, because it's not theoretical and manpower intensive like the USB attacks. It's something that is happening. So so it will get attention. At the very least, when problems are exploited, it forces a response. I think that the fact that Windows 11 is requiring a TPM module and a secure bootloader is no accident. It's basically cutting the line at, you want to run Windows 11, you are going to run into an environment that we think we can secure at the hardware level. And that means Windows 11 doesn't run in 9 out of 10 devices that we have today, but maybe that's okay. I don't know that it solves all problems, but it solves some of the problems. Of course, it's wickedly complex to configure the new BIOS. I forget the name of it. That's how much I like it, and the TPM. So it's a UX problem. If Microsoft can crack configuring those reliably across all vendors, so that we don't even know that there is a TPM, we're just asked to provide secure credentials for it. That's a great step forward. Unfortunately, it's also locking us out of hardware. We wind up not being able to play with hardware, so it cuts another way. But maybe some hardware is secured one way and some hardware gets secured another way. You can become your own authority if you're willing to go through that level of pain, or you buy some unsecured hardware at Raspberry Pi level, maybe. And you do your experimenting there. Like Steve Jobs used to say, the fact that you're making one thing one particular way doesn't mean that people cannot buy another thing that's done another way. Your one device doesn't have to solve everybody. But if it is a popular device, it needs to be good for a lot of people.
Were you trying to think of UEFI?
Thank you. Yes. Actually, I have to say that last time I set up an Ubuntu device on a UEFI machine, it was relatively seamless. I had a traumatizing experience in the early days of UEFI, and I've always gone other way. No, forget it. But recently, I had a device that was UEFI only, and I don't remember what version of Ubuntu I was setting up on it, but it just worked. So it looks like UEFI is no longer a UX problem. TPM.
We've been using UEFI for a long time. The big issue with Microsoft is the secure boot portion of that.
Right.
Because a lot of the servers that I used to run at Algorithmics, IBM, and HP were all UEFI.
So do those new requirements mean you're not going to be able to run Windows 11 in a VM?
That's interesting. I don't know what's going to happen in a VM when the VM is not running atop Windows. That's a good question. I imagine that Windows atop Windows, you can probably find a way to funnel the relevant the pertinent information, but I don't know what would happen with Windows on top of I don't know, ESX or on top of KVM.
I believe some hypervisors virtualize TPM, so it's a software TPM.
Right. Well, I guess that partially defeats the purpose, but you can still run Windows. So yeah.
True.
Yeah, that makes sense. Oh, and I was talking Raspberry Pi as the ultimate TPM-free device, but there are actually add-on boards for Raspberry Pi with a TPM model if you want one. So that can also be a cheap experimenting platform for TPM.
I'm not an expert in TPM, but I have a vague memory that the firmware in the CPUs can implement TPM, can have a virtual TPMs, and so it's not like when I learned about TPMs a long time ago, it was a separate chip, but nowadays
Right.
it's less that that's not so often.
Yeah, it's migrated in. We actually have, I don't know if it's recorded in our library, but we have James Bottomley, one of the Linux TPM authorities, as a guest a few years ago. I can't remember if we recorded him or not, but he went really deep into how the system works on Linux. I thought that there was another comment from Michael. So glad many laptops are going to USB-C as the only source of power. I think I may be a little bit snarky here. So the thing, actually, that is the thing that I like the most about the Apple announcement. Was it Monday, Tuesday? Because Apple devices are Apple laptops are going back to MagSafe. So first of all, I like MagSafe because as you can imagine, I'm in front of a computer all the time. I fall asleep in front of a computer, I drop a computer, and I trip on the cable, all sorts of things. So MagSafe absolutely makes sense for me, and I absolutely hate how snug the USB-C connection is, because at the very least I break the cable. If not, I damage the laptop. So actually, I had an occurrence of that with a very important laptop. Actually, I think it was my wife's PhD thesis was on it, and the device fell and the cable broke the motherboard power connector. We had to find a replacement power connector, do surgery on the motherboard to resuscitate it. So these are real problems. Even with the strong chassis that we have right now, breaking the connector on the motherboard is far from impossible. So MagSafe is an absolutely awesome thing on that regard. But also, given what I've said, having a charging channel that is power only, no data, yay! I'm all for it. Also, by the way, the new laptops from Apple, they can still charge over USB-C. So if you don't care, if you have a trusted USB-C charger, you can also charge over USB-C. But having a power only channel for me is the ultimate thing. So I think that Apple has secured my business for the next few years there. I'm also notoriously an ARM fan, so I'm quite interested in seeing what all my Macs are obviously x86 right now. Well, I suppose in the lab I have some older power hardware just for kicks, but I'm curious to see what ARM on the desktop, real ARM on the real desktop looks like.
That might be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Our friend John Masters has deserted Red Hat a few weeks ago. He is now at Google. So I think I may soon become the leading ARM advocate in Red Hat without him around.
Oh well.
I don't know if I'm up. I don't know if I'm up to the task. We need to bring him back.
Do you think RISC-V could surpass ARM in your efficacy?
I'm not a microprocessor nerd like Jan is, so I don't really have an opinion on the microarchitecture like he would. I tend to like or dislike chips based on how I feel when writing assembler, and so there are things that I like Motorola, PowerPC, 68K, generally that lineage. that is very assembly. The assembler for those chips is very reasonable. Also, old MIPS was probably the easiest assembler you could possibly write. I haven't looked at RISC-V. I hope that it's in the same strain as the traditional MIPS in terms of that aspect. Alpha was okay. x86 is probably the worst of the lot. Spark was also a pretty ugly offender with its circular registry. It's like, who came up with that? But the Motorola chip in general had lots of registers. They had a memory register on chip, so that's effectively its memory. You had like 1 kilobyte of memory, so you didn't need to go through RAM, bring it up before you could actually write a little bit of code. So they were very friendly to the software engineer, to the embedded engineer. And the MIPS devices are probably, they don't have that memory register as far as I remember, but they had at least lots of registers and a very clean syntax. So I like it, but whether I like it or not doesn't matter. ARM is very successful on mobile devices. Now Apple is going to make it a success on the desktop. I suppose it's anybody's guess if Apple decides to go into the data center. That would be interesting. Apple hasn't made a server since they used to make the Xserve. I think it was, maybe they had them in 2002, 2003. I don't think much later than that. So Apple has retreated from the server space a long time ago, and their server operations are notoriously not running macOS. They are running either Linux or BSD, as far as the outside world is aware of. So I don't know if they care. Apple is a company that is really brilliant at focusing. So they probably don't need to go into the data center space if they have other businesses that look more interesting, like, I don't know, healthcare or cars or who knows what. But these chips certainly look awesome. However, they look awesome because of the integration. So the performance of the new Apple Silicon stuff is great, but it is also partially great because of the integrated memory architecture. So you're moving data between the CPU and the video card without copying it. Instead of spending most of your 4 gigahertz CPU from Intel copying data like an idiot, and then doing some work on the data, the data is all in one place. And unless you need a copy because you're going to do different things to the two copies, the Apple architecture is basically letting the CPU, the GPU, and the video card access the same memory. So leaving aside the fact that the chip is good, just the saving in terms of moving data around is fantastic. Now that is great for the desktop. But if you move to the data center doesn't have video cards. So you already lost a big advantage in terms of that memory movement. I think it would be awesome in terms of Kurt's space. Kurt, are you awake? You can build a cluster out of new Mac laptops. I don't think they have enough cores for Kurt to be interested right now, but they will. I think that the max is 10 cores, 8 of which are serious cores. So I guess we would have to look at the power envelope to see if Kurt is interested. But
Kurt disconnected a while ago.
But the fact that you are not moving data between the GPU and the CPU makes it potentially very interesting for accelerated computation like ML. So does Apple care to compete there? They're happy to let NVIDIA do it. Who knows? Can't tell, because from Apple's point of view is, what is the biggest market that they can go after? The one where they can make the biggest difference and produce the biggest product. And it's a logic that's worked very well for them. And they have the discipline to follow it. So I don't think that we're going to see Apple in the data center very soon. But that would be one scenario for ARM to be successful in the data center. Without that, I think that AMD has compromised the path for ARM to the data center, because AMD's latest chips are just too good. Why would you go through the transition of porting all of your applications to ARM when the advantage of ARM is now shrunk so far that you can have the lower cost with an AMD chip, you can have better performance or same performance with an AMD chip? I think it undercuts the logic of ARM in the data center. Does it undercut it fully? I don't know. But the same problem kind of applies to RISC-V. If there is only Intel giving you x86 chips, then somebody else has to emerge. But if there is AMD doing a good job at competing, then as much as I dislike the assembler, x86 is a reasonable choice. We have all the code. If you can pit AMD and Intel against each other for giving you chips for a reasonable price and continuing to force progress, I don't know that there is that much of a room for ARM in the data center, and even more so RISC-V. There is one for RISC-V, however, which is China.
But wait. What about? Let me advocate for your own company. What about Power 9? Come on, it's got a Linux bootloader. Come on, let's.
That's funny. I actually love Power chips because, going back to my logic, they have one of the neatest assembler languages that you can get your hands on today. Leave aside the mainframe, that's in the doghouse, but the Power chips program, there's Power chips. They're absolutely awesome. But it's a small market, right? It's not mainstream. It keeps going, so hopefully it can continue.
Let's go back to PPA.
Power has been more successful, I think, in embedded hardware historically than in the data center. Also, IBM has made lots of money from Power in the data center, of course. But the other thing that you could use to leverage RISC-V into a favorable position is that China wants to break into tier 1 markets as a power player, not as the manufacturer, but as the designer, which maybe it's a problem for us, but I think it's a legitimate aspiration for them. I mean, who are we to tell them that they can't? So I think that we're seeing basically what happened in the 1970s when Japanese cars came in at the low end of the market, and you had the very cheap, I think that there were Datsun, which really is Nissan, low-end, low-cost cars. And then they moved up the quality chain, and today, basically, the highest quality cars that you can buy in the US that are not luxury cars are Japanese cars. It's kind of Clayton Christensen's logic about rebar and the evolution of the steel market. You disrupt the steel market by coming in and making rebar, which is the lowest possible quality of steel, perfect this new technology that's low cost, which in the 1980s was called mini mills, a lot smaller steel mills than traditional United Steel, gigantic operations. Traditional steel vendors like United Steel were perfectly okay to let the new entrants make rebar, because rebar is poor quality product, it's very low margin, and so sure, you can have it. I have higher margins and bigger problems to solve. But once the technology was perfected, they moved up, and now basically you cannot find a steel manufacturer in the United States that it's not a mini mill. We've seen the same thing with ARM processors. Sure, you can have the mobile phones. I have desktops. I can make 10 times the money you make, actually probably 20 times the money that you make selling one phone with desktops. But then ARM moved, then smartphones happen, and smartphones become ARM devices, and then tablets happen and they become ARM devices. And now laptops are becoming ARM devices, and you have Intel's CEO going onto CNBC or wherever else he was the other day saying that he's going to fight hard for the market. It's like, okay, it's a privilege, but you've already lost it. It's too late. Somebody's commenting that rebar is expensive now. Yes, that's a different supply chain problem. So I think that the thing about risk-V is because there are strategic restrictions about technology, which in part are legitimate because it's becoming increasingly possible to build increasingly dangerous things, not as USB cables, but as drones or as guided munitions or all sorts of things of that kind, using technology that we consider off-the-shelf technology for IT. There are all sorts of restrictions on circulating IP and actual hardware. Ironically, because a lot of this stuff is made in China or in Taiwan, or part of China, China feels left out of the IP global ecosystem to a large extent. And so I don't rule out that China could decide, hey, let's go behind risk-V. It's open. We can beef up this, and it could be an unrestricted chip that we have access to all the IP for. That could very reasonably happen. And in fact, Alibaba has open sourced, I think it was a dozen or so RISC-V chip designs just a couple of days ago. How far does this go? How good can it be? I don't know. I mean, the last time I looked at risk-V was when the vendor put out this announcement that said, we are not vulnerable to Spectre, which was the most ridiculous bit of marketing that I've seen outside of the stuff that Jeff Bezos' rocket company does. Yes, why is risk-V not vulnerable to Spectre? Because it is not a pipelined processor. So yes, I can go back and run a 1992 processor and not be vulnerable to Spectre. But pointing that out and saying I'm running 1992 technology here is not the way to make your product look good. Basically, effectively, everybody that had branch prediction and pipelining had this problem. ARM and x86 alike, so massively different architectures. RISC-V was immune because at that point it was a really crappy chip. Now it's significantly better. Let's see how far it goes. I can't really predict. It's interesting, and I have a few devices, and now they're actually, first one I got was able to run Arduino decently. The latest one I got can run Linux. So obviously it's making inroads. How long does it take? How far does it go? I can't say. So I see John saying that I'm speaking again in January, which I am. And so it looks like Jonathan is not available for November or December.
Yeah, I went back to read our last email together, and he said contact him next year.
When is the presentation in November? I may have a volunteer for you.
Well, the third Wednesday.
Let me ask them.
Calendar.
Third Wednesday?
Yep.
Let's see.
That would be
Carl?
the 17th. November.
Third Wednesday. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at October. My bad. 17th?
Yeah, 17th.
Okay.
17th.
Yeah. Okay. Let me look into that, and if I have a volunteer, I'll let you know tomorrow.
Okay, it sounds good.
Great. Okay. We're about to shut down.
Yeah, unless anyone else has any questions.
Okay.
Well,
Let me
thanks.
end the stream.
All right.
Thank you and have a good evening.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Good Good
Talk to you
discussion,
soon.
everybody. Thank you, Federico.
Thanks. This was enlightening and scary.
That's
Just
why we
as I-
have things to do.
It
If
was
all the
scary.
problems were already solved, we wouldn't need to do anything.